you'll hear me say this over and over and over again. This is one of the areas where I tend to get a little pedantic, and perhaps, at least by some measure, it's unnecessary. But people really abuse words. You see, on the one hand, words are arbitrary sounds ascribed meaning. On the other hand, these meanings have been used for a very, very, very long time in a somewhat standardized, or at least socialized way, where there is kind of a commonality to the usage so that people can actually fucking communicate. It's not a hard concept. So when we're dealing with that, we come across this one thing where sometimes words come from other established meanings, and while it was used in one sense, it could be used in another, and so on and so forth, and so we end up with multiple uses of, for a single word. And to a point, that's fine, but it helps to be able to communicate if you don't have to explain what you're talking about with more words every single time, because people have no idea what you're talking about. So, in the context of martial arts and fitness and survival and just general physical badassery, I want to define two terms. They get thrown around a lot, and I don't think people use terribly appropriately. One is the word power. The other is the word agility. Now, to give you a little background, when people train, they are training for a skill, an activity, a sport. They're training for strength, or they're conditioning. I include endurance in the conditioning part. I mean, it's just a different form of conditioning. But that being the case, there's kind of, with that variety and then so many micro expressions of each, there's a million words that can describe anything that you're doing, and most of it gets turned into bullshit and marketing hype. And some of the words that get thrown around that are easy to understand are things like strength and endurance. People understand, I'm strong, I pick up heavy shit. And people understand endurance, oh, I can go for a long time. Well, okay, that's fine. But words like power and agility get thrown around a little differently. Police forces use the term agility for their PT. And their tests are really far from true agility, I think, but that's another point. And we use the term power in several sports. I mean, you hear it thrown around in football, you hear it thrown around in boxing and other martial arts, you hear it thrown around in lifting. And it creates this kind of quagmire of what is actually going on, what is being defined. So let's start with power. The word power comes from I believe it's Middle English root that means to be able. That's it. It just means to be able. Well, that's clear as mud, right? I mean, it doesn't really mean anything that you couldn't say with other words, right? So the useful thing is that we took the word power and we applied it to a million things, and now we have political power and sexual power and social power and physical power and brain power and all sorts of shit. But science to the rescue. Science needed a term, and they got it. There was measurements for energy, and there was measurement for work, and there was measurement for duration and all that kind of stuff. And science said, let's put these things together and say how much energy or how much work can be done in a certain span of time. And thus we end up getting the watt. And the watt is literally 1 joule per second. That is the standard measure of the watt. So 1 joule per second gives you a nice standard measure. I don't expect you to measure it. I don't measure it because I don't really believe in measuring. It seems to ruin the fun of life and surprises and chaos, and I like those things. But you have now a kind of standard idea. It is work plus time. So the idea of power now, using a scientific definition, now you can't say it's the same thing as strength. Because strength, we really define, and I'm not going into the etymology here, but strength we define as basically the ability to do work. It's muscular output is really all strength is. It's just physical, muscular output to move a load. It's the ability to do work. It's the ability to produce joules. That's about it. But if you can only do so at a snail's pace, it's not very useful. So then we create a word like power, or we apply a word like power to be able, because it's more than to just do the thing, it's to really be able. George Hebert used to like to say, be strong to be useful. That is power. It is the idea of power. It is being able to apply your strength at speed. Now, what does at speed mean? Does it mean you're moving as quick as the Flash? No, by no means. It may, but it may not. Does it mean the explosive power you need for football or gymnastics, parkour? Maybe, but not necessarily. Does it mean being able to throw a punch at 120 miles an hour? Maybe, but not necessarily. Is just at speed just means at a useful pace. So power is the ability to not only lift things, but to lift things in such a way that it is actually useful. That being the case, an isometric hold will never be a power maneuver. It's purely a strength maneuver. However, lifting an Atlas stone onto a platform is certainly a power maneuver. A deadlift is certainly a power maneuver. This is why we call it powerlifting. Most of these, in fact, I won't say that. Oftentimes, strongman. In strongman competition, you are fighting against the clock. They're not necessarily going for a max lift, they're going for damn heavy lifts multiple times in a time period. It's really the epitome of power. It's the whole idea of strongman to begin with. Look at the Highland Games. You're dealing with being able to hurl heavy objects. It's a throwing sport with goddamn heavy objects. It's amazingly awesome and very, very powerful. It's the ability to generate power. So just understand that, especially when you and I are talking, when we're conversing about these things, when I say power, I literally mean strength at speed. Strength put to use for a task. Now, on the other side, agility. We generally define agility as being able to move with grace and poise and balance and suppleness and all that. Kind of like, I don't know, Spider-Man. But the word agility comes from Middle English, meaning to do. To do. That's it. That means less than power. At least power means to be able. Agility just means to do. Well, okay. So that doesn't really shed any light on the idea. But unfortunately, we don't have a scientific use for it. So we don't have a place to plug it into some like raw, universalized mathematical equation or anything. Agility just doesn't fit there. So we have to go with common use. And common use, generally speaking, agility is applied to exercising certain skills with a modicum of balance and grace, and to a point speed and suppleness. I won't necessarily say flexibility, but suppleness, the ability to flow, really. Dancing is very much a show of agility. Wushu competition is very much a show of agility, and you'd be surprised there are a number of mundane tasks that can be considered to employ agility. So when we are discussing agility, I want you to understand that really, if power is strength at speed, then agility is power with finesse. Really, the two build on top of each other. And the thing is that sometimes raw power is plenty good enough. Sometimes agility with a little less power, with a little less strength behind it, with a little less joules, a little fewer joules behind it, is fine. But, being able to drop down into a split is not agility. Being able to do the Fosberg flop is pretty damn agile, as an example. So there you have it. Just at least for defining terms among us, power is strength at speed, and agility is power with finesse. That's all I got for you. I will talk to you next time. Good journey.